Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at a game that was played in the late title Tuesday, today, September 17th of the great year 2024. Now, the game in question occurred in the ninth round of Title Tuesday between the five-time world champion, Magnus Carlsen, and yours truly. Now, a little over 1 month ago, Magnus and I actually played against each other on August 6th in a game which Magnus won en route to going 11 out of 11, a perfect score, which has only been achieved 5 times in the entire history of the event. More recently, we also played and drew. I believe I've done a video on both those games, but today's game is a little bit different. So, going to this game, Magnus Carlsen is playing from Budapest, Hungary on the rest day of the Olympiad against me. This game, going into the game, I should say, the scores are I'm tied for first place with 7.5 points out of 8, alongside the very strong Russian player, Danil Dubov, and Magnus is a half point behind with 7 out of 8. So I'm playing with the black pieces once again against Magnus for a third time in a row in Title Tuesday, and let's check out the game. So the game starts with the move knight to f3. Here I play the move d5. We get b3, c5, e3, knight c6, and now Magnus plays the move bishop to b2. Now, when we played on August 6th and Magnus went perfect with 11 out of 11, he played this move bishop b5, and after f6, the game was very choppy, really up and down, back and forth, but today he decides to play the move bishop b2. Now, after bishop b2, I decide to play the move f6 anyway, and now Magnus goes for the move d4. Now, if Magnus were to play a move like bishop to e2, for example, here I can play his move pawn to e5, building this classic big black center here, and black is doing very well. So Magnus goes d4 to stop me from playing e5 here, as white would simply capture and win a pawn, and now I go bishop g4. Magnus plays the move h3, I go bishop to h5, and here we get the move bishop e2. Now I play the move e6, trying to guard the pawn on d5 and intending to capture with the bishop on the c5 square. Magnus castles, and now I go rook to c8, and here we get this move c4 being played. Now I will point out that in this evening Title Tuesday, I was pretty tired. I was definitely struggling. And in this opening, it's already off to a very poor start here because I'm lacking in development. You'll see I have the rook, knight, bishop, king, queen. All 5 of these pieces are on their starting squares. So in this position, I decide to play the move pawn takes pawn after nearly a 20-second thing. Already here, I'm feeling a little bit shaky because one of the things that's really important when you play against Magnus is to not get behind on the clock. And already I am now down 10 plus seconds. So Magnus takes with the knight. Very important here that he does not take with the pawn, because after bishop to d6, let's just say knight c3 and knight g7, black should be relatively okay here. But when Magnus captures with the knight, I have to trade the bishops on e2, and I'm still lacking in development with all these pieces on their original squares. Additionally, white can bring the knight out quickly, put the rook on d1, and I have the weaknesses on e6 and d5, and already I'm feeling like I might be losing the game. So I trade the knights on d4, Magnus takes with the pawn, and this is already an interesting situation. Now, Magnus probably should have taken with the bishop here, but I understand why he didn't do it, because probably figured after the move pawn to a6, I'm going to be able to play e5, develop the knight very quickly, and the bishop is simply in the way. Even though it is a wooden shield, the bishop is in the way, whereas when white takes with the pawn, now you open up this e file immediately to go after the weakness on e6, and you would think intuitively white should be much better, but I will mention once again, the computer does prefer bishop takes pawn. So here I go king to f7, and this is a move that I really did not want to play, but at the end of the day, if I play a move like queen to d7 and white takes, I take, and he goes knight c3, and I go back, white can simply play d5, and after e5 and f4, the center of the board is opening up here. White is bringing the rooks to e1 and d1. The knight can even go to e4. Let's just say bishop d6 and knight e4, and all of a sudden, there's tons of pressure, and I'm actually simply losing the game. So I go king f7, Magnus plays knight c3, and here I have to play the move knight e7. Now, the move that I wanted to play initially was bishop b4. Fortunately, I did not play this move because after pawn takes pawn here, I'm in a lot of trouble. If I take what looks like a free horse here with bishop c3, white can take on e6, and after king g6, queen g4, king f7, white can now play the move rook a c1, attacking the bishop and trying to win the rook on c8. If I take the bishop here, after queen e6 check, king g6, and rook takes c8, it is an absolute disaster for me. I have the knight and the rook, which are on their original squares. My king is on g6. Probably the best I can do is go queen e7, but after takes, white takes the rook, and I resign the game. And if I play a move like queen a5, many ways for white to win, but even rook takes knight, takes is quite simple, as white has a rook in return for a bishop. So I end up playing this move knight to e7 instead, and now we get to move rook fe1, and here I go queen d7, trying to protect the weakness on e6. Magnus now plays queen h5, I go g6, and he goes back to f3, trying to exert even more pressure on the pawn on d5 and e6, but also now on the weak pawn on f6 as well. Now here I end up playing the move bishop g7. I, for brief second, thought that maybe I could take on c4, but if I take on c4 here, after white takes back and I take on c4 with the rook, there's now the move d5, opening up the center of the board, and black is in tons of trouble. If I take on d5 with the pawn, there's now knight to e4 here. The queen, the bishop, and the knight are all attacking the pawn. The king on f7 is weak, and this is just completely lost. Black is just done for. So I play the move bishop g7 instead, trying to finish my development and bring my h-rook to either e8 or d8. Magnus plays bishop to a3, and now I go for this move pawn takes pawn. Now, this move is not the best move, but already here, I'm really in a tough spot. If I don't make a move relatively quickly, if I spend like a minute or more on this move, I could be in a lot of trouble. Now, you will notice I do end up spending 40 seconds here, but when I play this move, I have a clear-cut idea of what my next couple of moves will be. At any rate, it's very difficult. So I take Magnus, now plays the move knight to e4, and this is a mistake here. Now, Magnus is very good at using time precisely, and he does use the time, but he actually makes a mistake here. The move d5 would be winning for white, because in this position, if I play knight takes pawn, now white can play rook a to d1, and there's all kinds of pressure towards the center. You might think I could play rook h8 and survive here, but after rook h8 and now knight to e4, there's this big fork on d6, hitting the rook and the king, rooks and the king. There's also a threat of knight g5 as well, and the computer shows that white is simply winning here. Now, is this easy to find? Probably not, but I should point it out that this was a moment where there was a winning move for Magnus, whereas in the game, after he goes knight to e4, now I can play knight to f5, stopping knight to d6, and if white plays g4 here, now I take the pawn on d4, and the fork no longer works. I can sack my queen. If you take this queen, you lose your queen and then the rook. And if you play a move like queen b7, I calmly block with my queen, and now I have an extra horse on d4, and I should win the game. So, Magnus goes rook a d1, a logical move to protect the pawn, and intend to play g4. Here I go rook h d8, and now Magnus plays this move d5. Now, to set the scene for anybody who watches either the eventual video, which will probably be uploaded to this channel, of Title Tuesday, or even if you were watching live on my kick stream, you probably would have noticed that I actually pre-moved e takes d5, expecting d5, but for whatever reason, I was able to realize that it didn't work, and I undid this pre-move before Magnus would play d5. Now, Magnus spent 48 seconds on this move. If he played this move in the first 20 seconds, I would have executed the pre-move with pawn takes pawn, and after knight to d6 check here, knight takes and queen takes d5, white is much better, if not... Actually, I thought white was winning. Maybe he's not winning cleanly. After king to f8, I thought white could go rook to e6 here, although apparently I have queen f7, and if white takes knight, I guess I sack the rook, and after takes and c3, followed by bishop h6, maybe it's not completely lost. Although I do think after rook c1, bishop h6, f4 is another odd move. If I take, there's rook f6, winning the bishop. And I guess white is much better here. At any rate, I assumed it was completely lost, which is why I undid the pre-move. Now, Magnus would end up playing d5 about 10 to 15 seconds after I'd undone the pre-move. And luckily, I now was able to play the move e5, closing the center of the board and intending to put the knight on d4, h4. Now, one thing that's very different about Blitz versus classical chess that you will notice that with perfect play, white should be winning. But in Blitz games, you have to manage your time, you have to calculate, you do all these little things very importantly. And when the game starts to spiral out of control and you don't have tons of time to think, it's very easy to go wrong. And actually, in this position, I thought I was doing quite well. So Magnus plays knight c5 after a 10-second thing. And here I miss a big opportunity when I play this move queen to e7. What I should have played here was the move queen d6. Now, I did use 24 seconds before playing it, but if I play queen d6 instead of queen e7 here, I probably am winning the game, because now white is a huge issue with the bishop and the knight here. If you take the pawn, I take the bishop, and after takes, I have a bishop and a knight in return for the rook, and I probably should be winning. However, after queen d6, I think that in my mind, intuitively, I felt that there's probably some kind of fossil, some kind of knight move. There's something that's wrong with the queen on d6. Whereas when I put the queen on e7 here, now there's no way to move the knight and immediately attack the queen, which is why I went for this move. But had I played queen d6, there's a very, very good chance that I would have won this game. But alas, I played queen e7. So now Magnus goes d6. I play rook takes pawn, and here he plays move rook takes rook. I do think that initially Magnus thought he was probably better here after a move like knight takes pawn. But here I can sack the queen with rook takes rook. If white takes back, now I have queen takes bishop, and I'm a little bit better. And if white takes the queen, I take the rook, and after king h2 and king takes e7 here, I have 2 rooks and a knight in return for the queen, and I should be winning. So Magnus takes with rook takes rook. I play queen takes rook. Now he goes queen takes pawn. I play rook c7, and here Magnus plays the move queen to b4. Now I play the move queen to d5. Important move, by the way, because if I take this pawn on b3 after takes, the king and the queen are very, very weak on the diags. If I go king e7, There's simply knight to e4 here, and I lose my queen. And if I go king to e8, now white can play the move knight to e6, creating the fossil. Queen guards the knight. Knight forks the bishop and the rook, and the bishop hits the queen at the same time. And this is simply GG on the spot, and I resign the game. So I play queen d5, and now Magnus takes with the pawn. I go for the move queen to c6 here, and Magnus plays knight e4. Now I play rook to b7, and at this point during the game, I thought that I was going to win because now I'm up more than 10 seconds on the clock. My position is pretty much simplified, and at this point, my move should be very slightly easier. Magnus goes queen a5. Now I play the move rook d7, an important move, by the way, because if I take this pawn on c4, now white has g4 attacking the knight. And if I move the knight, it's the uh-oh spaghetti-o moment with knight d6, creating the classic family fork. Knight forks the queen, the rook, and the king at the same time. So I play rook to d7 here, taking away this knight d6 idea. Now if white were to play g4, I can simply go knight to d4, trying to create my own forks of the king, the rook, and the bishop here. And I'm doing fine as knight d6 no longer exists. So instead, Magnus goes bishop c5, a nice move. And this also shows the class of Magnus to play this move after a 3-second thing. Because this is not a move that, in my opinion, is very easy to find here. There's knight d4, the c4 pawn is weak. c5 actually feels much more human to me. But bishop c5 is, in fact, the best computer move, which shows the absolute class that Magnus has. So I go g5 here, trying to maybe go knight h4, knight d4. But additionally, I want to create some space for my king to go to g6 as well. Magnus plays queen b5. I play rook c7. We get the trade, and now we have the move bishop takes pawn. Here I go rook to a6, and this is a move that I'm playing very quickly here. Rook takes c4 would have been fine, but I was actually worried about g4 attacking the knight. If I move the knight, there was a fork with knight d6 here, and I guess I have rook to a4 here, and after takes rook a7, the game should be a draw, but I'm moving quickly, trying to press Magnus on the clock, so I go rook a6 instead, attacking the bishop and the pawn. We get bishop to e3, I take on a2, and now Magnus plays the move rook b1. Here I play the move h5, we get g4, we swap, and now I take on e3, and I go bishop f8. Now at this point, I was feeling good about the position. I'm up 8 seconds on the clock, but more importantly, I don't think I should be able to lose. But again, this is Magnus Carlsen we're talking about. He is an endgame wizard, and he can create great winning chances, seemingly out of thin air. Magnus goes check. I go bishop e7. We get to move rook c7. And now I play this move king to e6. It's worth pointing out that after bishop to e7, Magnus should have played the move knight to c3, attacking the rook. Because if I move the rook anywhere besides the a1, say rook a6, after knight d5, rook to e6, and c5, I go king to f8 to break the pin. But now after knight takes bishop, rook takes, and c6, white is pushing the pawn up the board, and white is in fact winning this position. Now, after knight c3, I should play rook a1, king f2, and king to e6. But after rook b6, king d7, and knight d5, while it's still a draw with perfect play, white has an active knight targeting the bishop and the pawn, and it will be a tough defense. Instead, Magnus plays rook c7. Now I go king e6. We get rook c6. I go back, and we get to move king f1. Here I play rook c2, trying to put pressure on this pawn on c4 while keeping the king cut off and on the back rank. Magnus goes knight g3. I play bishop b4. We get knight f5. And now I play this move bishop to a3. Now, at this point, I'm low on time. Magnus is low on time. I'm simply trying to avoid a blunder. And you might look at this position and think, wow, white has this great knight on f5. Now, white does have the great knight, but at the same time, the bishop is covering a lot of the very important dark squares. As long as I don't accidentally walk into some checkmate like king g6, I should be able to save the game. So we get rook c7, I go king e8, we get king e1, and now I play the move bishop b4, king d1, and here I play the move rook g2. Magnus goes rook b7, I play bishop f8, we get check, king f7, and here we have a very important moment where Magnus blunders with this move rook to b7. Now, of course, we're both low on time and moving instantly, but in this position after rook to b7 and bishop to f8 here, what Magnus should have played was this move rook to c7. So I take the pawn, now white can go c5, rook c4, and c6, and it's probably okay and still a draw for me, but I have to be extremely careful with the rook and the pawn coming up the board, the active knight on f5, and I still think there's a good chance that I could have made a blunder and lost at this point. But instead, Magnus goes check, king f7, check, and here I miss my golden opportunity to win the game when I miss this move king to g6. Now, king g6 would be winning here for me because the pawn on g4 is super weak here. Actually, you can't even guard it. If you play rook b8, I take the pawn, you take the bishop, I take the knight, and I should win the game. And if white plays this move c5, which is the best move, now I take the pawn, and the knight is no longer guarded on f5. And after knight to d6 and rook to a4 here, I'm simply up a pawn on the g file. I can start pushing this pawn up the board, and I should win. Alas, I end up playing the move king to e8. We get rook to b6. I take, Magnus takes, I take on c4. And after rook to e6, king f7, and rook takes e5, all the material is coming off the board. It is simplifying, and the game is about to end in a draw. So I go g4, I get king e2, king f6, rook d5. I play rook c5 here. This is a move that I didn't want to play. But again, Magnus, even if he only has 3 seconds, there is a 1-second increment. I can't really flag him. So I trade the rooks. He goes knight h6. I take on e3. And after knight takes g4, the game ends in a draw due to insufficient material. I can move the king. He can take the bishop. King and knight versus king is simply a draw. So the game ends in a draw after this move, knight takes g4. This is a very hard-fought game. Mostly, I would say Magnus was better, but there were those 2 moments. First of all, with queen to d6, but also with king to g6 as well near the end, where I could have gotten a win. On the flip side, you could also say Magnus could have played d5, d6 earlier. He had his own chance to win. So I think a draw is a pretty fair result in this game. So with that draw, that moved me to 8 points out of 9, and Magnus 7.5 out of 9. Unfortunately, I would lose in the final game of the event to Jose Martinez Alcantara with the black pieces, which means that I would finish 3rd place. I think Magnus lost the game in round 10, or maybe he drew. He would finish outside the top 10 in the event, and he was quite far from the prizes. But at any rate, I do think this was a very exciting game. Anytime Magnus and I do play in events like Title Tuesday, the fans always love those games. So I thought it would make for a good recap, and I really hope you guys did enjoy the recap of this game played between Magnus and myself in the late Title Tuesday on September 17th, 2024. Now, if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some more great recaps as the Chess Olympiad continues tomorrow from Budapest. See you guys soon, and have a great rest of your evening. Bye.